Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have been dominating the toy aisles for nearly 40 years. And they've stayed pretty culturally significant throughout the years because every now and then they come back, reinvent themselves time and time again. But since the Turtles' inception, there's been many action figure toy lines that tried to follow the same recipe. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What were some of those forgotten anthropomorphic toy lines that we probably love in the toy world, but outside of that are mainly forgotten? Welcome back, everybody, and today I kind of want to talk about some of those action figure toy lines that flew a little too close to the sun that was Tmnt and could not quite get to the same level as them. And when I say forgotten toy lines, some of these on the list you're going to say, well, they're not really forgotten. We remember those, we love them, but try to look at it from the perspective of maybe people that are not into toy collecting and, once childhood was done, they forgot about all that stuff. So in terms of popularity, you can pretty much go up to anyone that's not a toy collector, mention Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're probably going to know what you're talking about. But as you start mentioning some on this list, they may know nothing or very little at all about this forgotten toy line. So again, I'm kind of going in the aspect of that. So we're going to start this list from probably the least forgotten all the way down to the most forgotten. And when we get to the bottom of the list, I think we're going to get to some pretty obscure toy lines. So we're going to get into it, the most forgotten anthropomorphic toy lines of the 90s. And probably one of the least forgotten toy lines that made my anthropomorphic list are the Street Sharks. And I know you might be thinking, Thomas, you're crazy, everyone remembers Street Sharks. Not quite. Everyone that is involved with toys definitely remembers Street Sharks. You've probably followed them throughout the years. You probably had a lot of their toys. But outside of that, I don't think they have the same name recognition as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But I do think they're the ones that got the closest to that stature. Now, Street Sharks, they were released in 1994 by Mattel, and I love these figures as a kid. I didn't have any, but I love seeing the commercials, I love watching the show, and the products just looked a lot cooler. They came in those caged boxes, which definitely stood out from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They did kind of follow the same recipe as Turtles. 4 brothers turned into turtles, 4 brothers turned into sharks. But in terms of forgotten, I think most people, they might recognize the Street Shark name, but again, if you're not in that world, can anyone name off the 4 main characters, the villain? Can anyone name some of their iconic vehicles like the Shark Cruiser? I know those things because I follow toy news and things like that, but my average friend probably won't recognize them. I'm also putting them at the very top of probably the least forgotten because they've also gotten so much love over the last couple of years. Mondo did a stylized figure of them. I thought that figure was really cool, but since I never had a chance to get these as a kid, I love that Mattel did the 30th anniversary. I was able to pick up at least the team of the 4 brothers, and they're on my shelf. I love them, and it's just cool for those people that never got a chance to play with them as a kid like myself. In terms of forgotten toy lines, I'm going to put them at the very top, and again, these are your least forgotten anthropomorphic toy lines. Next on the list goes to, I'd say, Street Shark's toy cousin, which are Extreme Dinosaurs. They were released in 1997, again by Mattel, and they were made in the same style and vein as the Street Sharks. They had the same design, and they had the big teeth, just like the Street Sharks. I couldn't name any of them, right? So, and I'm pretty involved in toy news and toy history, but it was just not a toy line that, when it came out, we were already invested in so many other toy lines, so I never really got a chance to play with them. But that's just my personal perspective. Outside of that, and outside of hardcore collectors, I think this is even more forgotten than Street Sharks. And you gotta remember, at this part in the 90s, everything was extreme, muscles were bigger, the bodies were bigger, right? So they did stand out from the Turtles, but I think that even next to Street Sharks, they're a little more forgotten outside of toy collecting communities. Next on my list are the Biker Mice from Mars, produced by Galoob in 1993. This was a great set of action figures. I won't call them complete copycats of the Turtles. There were some similarities. They went from a team of 4 with Turtles to a team of 3 with the Biker Mice. and they liked hot dogs versus pizza. So not a complete ripoff. They took place in this dystopian future. The motorcycles and the actual mice part, just combining those is a wacky concept, but was pretty cool. But I think in terms of cultural significance, they didn't quite get to that level as TMNT. Now, like Street Sharks, they are seeing a little bit of a resurgence in popularity amongst toy collectors because we did have Nacelle Toys release a line of action figures. I have all three mice and the bikes. I haven't really branched out to the other characters, but it's just kind of fun to see these older toy lines getting love because a lot of kids didn't have these back in the day because maybe their parents were focused on different toy lines that they've been collecting for years, like the Turtles. But still a great toy line. I love it, but they're still going to be on the list of forgotten anthropomorphic characters. Next on my list is Bucky O'Hare. These were produced by Hasbro in 1991, and I think their biggest mistake was probably coming out around the same time as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because if parents were already invested in buying Turtles for their kids, they probably passed up on the Bucky O'Hare toy line. But I did know some kids with this toy line. I always wished I had it because the neon green rabbit sounds awesome. Unfortunately, I never owned any, but they came out with a whole bunch of anthropomorphic characters, bunnies, ducks, toads, and a dog, I think. But they also had some cool vehicles. And this is just a toy line that I feel like deserves some love nowadays. I know Boss Fight Studio did a version of a Bucky O'Hare. I would say widely forgotten in the grand scheme of things, even though a lot of us did love that franchise. But unfortunately for that, they're going to have to make the list. Next on the list are the Cowboys of Mesa. They were produced by Hasbro in 1992, and they were just a super fun toy line. Not much Western stuff coming out. So it was kind of a breath of fresh air. We're getting a lot of futuristic stuff or sci-fi, but cows, cowboys, it just kind of made sense. I had Boot Hill Buzzard and Dakota Dude. I would pair them up with my wacky Western TMNT figures. They just went great together. But unfortunately, I think this one is widely forgotten by people outside of the toy collecting world. There was one vehicle that I just learned about when kind of looking up information about Cowboys of Mesa. It was the Iron Horse. This thing looks super cool. I can only imagine what it's going for on the aftermarket, but I'm going to probably check after this video. I am super excited that Nacelle Toys also picked up the license for this forgotten toy line because I was able to pick up at least some of the cows that I wanted. I know there's more coming out. I got my Moo Montana, so I'm going to be really excited when we finally do get Dakota Dude, so I can kind of relive those childhood memories. So far with all of the toy lines that we've talked about, I think most of them were trying to capture that TMNT ghost or magic. The next few that we're going to talk about, I think just kind of existed in their own world. I don't think they were trying to imitate or copy Turtles, but I would say widely forgotten. And this next one goes to Darkwing Duck. These were produced in 1991 by Playmates. I remember the original lineup because we had most of them, probably missing a few, but there was 8 figures, there were some vehicles, they even had a video game. And I remember watching the show every day getting home from school. It was kind of the more cartoonish, goofier version of Batman, right? It was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but the figures were awesome. They had awesome action features. The one I remember the most was Megavolt. He was the rat because you would kind of wind up his back and there'd be sparks flying. They would never make anything like that nowadays, but back in the early 90s, we got some cool stuff like that. In terms of toy lines and what the average person would remember, they're still going to have to go on the forgotten list, even though I remember these and I love them. There was always this fight between Disney or Nickelodeon kids, right? I remember talking on the schoolyard, what do you like more, Disney Afternoon, Nicktoons? But Cartoon Network came onto the scene, and I just remember the first time that I saw SWAT Cats. That intro song is iconic. I can actually just like listen to that guitar riff over and over again. I'm going to put these as forgotten. Personally, I didn't even know they made toys until years later, but when I did go to look them up and see how much they're fetching for, these are super expensive toys. I think if there's any toy line that needs a resurgence, it's SWAT Cats. But they came with 4 figures, 2 heroes, 2 villains. And man, they are awesome. I wish that this character line would have grown. And I just remember seeing it late at night on Cartoon Network. So it was definitely one of my favorites. But it is going to make the forgotten list. The next 2 on this list, we're going to go back to Disney a little bit. but I think these are definitely more forgotten than Darkwing Duck. And one, I think, is it's forgotten in the sense that there was a toy line, and that goes to the Mighty Ducks. These toys were produced in 1996 by Mattel, and they had a great lineup of the entire roster, which was great. And it was based off the cartoon. I only had a few of these. Nosedive was my favorite, and actually one of my favorite vehicles of the 90s was the motorcycle that they had. It had the hockey goal mask of the duck. It was kind of shaped like a duck. And then the side profile of that motorcycle looked like a rollerblade. So much fun. There was the movie. Everyone remembers the movies, the live action ones. And then, of course, there was an NHL hockey team. But most people probably do forget that there was this cartoon and then figures. But not only can you get the figures in their superhero crime fighting outfits, you could also get them in their hockey outfits. So if you were more a sports person, you could have collected those and had just as much fun. And the last of the Disney toy lines, I know we mentioned Darkwing Duck and the Mighty Ducks, has to go to Tailspin. These action figures were produced by Playmates in 1991. They had a nice roster and some vehicles. They had the Sea Duck and Don Cornage's Tri-Wing Terror. Really awesome if you had both of these as a kid, because you could do some dog fights, but just kind of a mixture of old Disney characters mixed into a modern era cartoon, and then you added the element of pirates and swashbuckling. But they do have to make the list of forgotten because I really didn't know too many people that had it. And they must be rare because when I've looked up prices for the Tailspin action figures on eBay, they are super expensive. So not a lot of people had them. A lot of people might want them now because those prices are super high. And for that, they're going on the forgotten toy list. Next on this list of forgotten anthropomorphic figures goes to something that I think should remain forgotten, and that is the Warriors of Virtue. These were made by Play-Em Toys in 1997 to go along with the movie. It was a movie about these humanoid kangaroos that did kung fu. I don't know if it was a ripoff of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I didn't like the trailer for the movie. I thought the kangaroo effects looked horrible, and I thought the toys looked equally as bad. If this was a favorite toy line of yours, I'm sorry. My personal preference. But for me, I was already probably watching movies that were maybe a little more mature. And at the time, the Tank Girl movie came out, and there were these characters in it that were humanoid kangaroos called the Rippers, and they were badass. So my memory at the time was I'd rather figures of the Rippers from Tank Girl than I'd rather these Warriors of Virtue. So for that, they're going on the list, and as you can tell, we're getting a little more and more obscure. So I think these next three are probably the most obscure. Next entry on this list goes to Muscle Mutts. I had no idea these existed until a couple of years ago. I'm sure if you are a hardcore Street Sharks or a Extreme Dinosaurs fan, you know what Muscle Mutts are, but I was just super surprised to even know that these existed. They were made in 1996 and 1997 by Streetwise Designs, and not done by Mattel, but these were definitely made to either compete or go with your Street Sharks and Extreme Dinosaurs. Highly stylized cats and dogs, and I must say right now, probably of all the figures on this list, these are the ones that go for the most amount of money. We have a local toy store here in Orlando that sells vintage toys, and when I walked by this figure in the case from Muscle Mutts and saw the price tag at $1,250, damn. So obviously very rare, and I don't think a lot of people knew about them in the 90s, but now that they have that adult money and want to fit them into their Street Shark and Extreme Dinosaur displays, I guess they're willing to shell that out. But I'm going to put them at really the forgotten, more obscure anthropomorphic toys. Second to last on this list goes to a toy line that I really loved, but I didn't know anybody that had them except me and my brother, and that goes to BC Bikers Dinosaurs of the Chrome Age. And these were kind of wacky, goofy figures. They were rubber dinosaurs, and they only had 5 points of articulation. You put them on these motorcycles that had these training wheels. You pull the motorcycle back, you let it rip, and it would drive the motorcycle. They didn't have grip hands, so they wouldn't even like hold on to the handlebars. Pretty wacky. But these were made in 1992 by Ace Novelty. I remember the commercial like it was yesterday, so for me, it's not forgotten for myself. I just think mostly in a group of toy collectors, I don't hear a lot of people talking about BC Bikers, so I'd say pretty obscure, pretty forgotten. even though it was something that I really loved, they're going to have to be on this list, and especially way towards the bottom as the most forgotten. Now, for the most forgotten anthropomorphic toy line on this list, I'm going to go give it to Cyborgs. Do you remember Cyborgs? I don't think many people do. These were anthropomorphic boars from outer space, and they each had a gimmick in terms of what their skill was. You had a flamethrower guy, a speedster, a bruiser, and I remember one friend had one of these, and they just did not appeal to me. If you were collecting turtles in the early 90s, fast forward to 1997, you might not have been into toys at this time, so I don't know a lot of people that have grabbed them, but they had some media. I think they were supposed to be a pilot for a show, and you can probably try to find that somewhere, but this just didn't have a lot of traction. They were made by Imaginary Limits, and they only made, I think, about 6 figures, and they had some really wacky names. You had Airbore, who was the Robo-Rocketeer. Bush Hog was like your motorcycle guy. Chop Suey was your ninja. Hog Kong was your bruiser. And then Stampede and Rapid Fire was your speedster and I guess your pyro guy. I think they came way too far off of the TMNT timeline to even be relevant or exciting for kids who have already seen all those other anthropomorphic toy lines, and for that, they're going at the most forgotten anthropomorphic toy line of the 90s. And that does it with this list, folks. There's about 13 anthropomorphic forgotten toy lines that I listed here, but I'm sure I might have missed some. So if I did, let me know down in the comments. And until the next episode, we'll catch you next time.
We'll be right back.